Picture this. One of the biggest music legends alive, 85 years old, knighted by the Queen, with 250 million records sold, sits down in front of the cameras and casually drops a story that leaves the internet reeling. Sir Cliff Richard, Britain's eternal pop prince, is talking about the one man he spent his entire life idolizing, imitating, and, this is the twist, avoiding. Elvis Presley. The king. The man Cliff built his whole career on. So why did Cliff turn down a chance to actually meet him? And what is he saying about it now, decades later? The story is messier than anyone expected. To understand this story, you first have to understand just how deeply Cliff Richard once idolized Elvis Presley. This wasn't casual fandom. It was a full-on, identity-shaping obsession. Cliff Richard was born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in Lucknow, India. After his family moved to England, he grew up in modest circumstances in Hertfordshire, an ordinary British teenager in an ordinary world. Then everything changed on a Saturday morning in May 1956. That day, still going by Harry Webb, he was walking down Waltham Cross High Street with his friends Norma Mitham and Terry Smart. They passed a parked green Citroën with its window open, and out of it drifted a sound none of them had heard before, the opening line of Heartbreak Hotel. A man ran out of the newsagent's, jumped in the car, and drove off, taking the music with him. The boys spent the rest of the afternoon trying to figure out what they just heard. By Monday, Norman had the answer. The song was Heartbreak Hotel, by someone called Elvis Presley. They laughed at the name. Elvis? Who's called Elvis? From that moment on, as Cliff later wrote in his memoir, he became obsessed, hunting down everything he could learn about this new singer. It wasn't even the lyrics that hooked him, it was the rhythm, the feel, the attitude. When he finally saw a photo of Elvis, he was struck by how cool he looked, quiff and curled lip included. When he learned Elvis had an album out, he knew he had to own it. But there was a problem: money. So the teenage Harry Webb took a summer job picking potatoes on a local farm, spending long, aching days in the mud for $1 an hour. He later said the boredom and backache were worth it the moment he could finally afford that record. The devotion didn't stop there. He started eating peanut butter and jam on toast because he'd read Elvis liked it, an acquired taste, he admitted, but one he worked at. He wore Elvis's favorite colors, pink and black. He copied the leg-shaking stage moves and the carefully messy hairstyle that looked spontaneous but was anything but. Cliff was originally marketed as a rebellious rock and roller in the Presley mold, and his 1958 hit Move It is often called Britain's first authentic rock and roll record. The country embraced him as the British answer to Elvis, the English Elvis. It's a nickname Cliff has spent decades gently resisting, insisting there's no such thing as an answer to Elvis, because Elvis was never a question. He would always be the king. Which raises the obvious question: if Cliff worshipped this man so completely that he picked potatoes in the mud just to buy his records, why, when he finally had the chance to meet him, did he say no? Cliff didn't just miss meeting Elvis once. He missed him 3 times, and each story is stranger than the last. In the late 1950s, while Elvis was serving in the military in Germany, Cliff was on a European holiday with Shadows drummer Tony Meehan and some friends. On the way home, someone suggested a detour to see if they could find Elvis. The house wasn't hard to locate. The walls outside were covered in graffiti declaring love for Elvis. Cliff walked up, knocked, and a large American man answered. Elvis wasn't in, the man said, and asked who Cliff was. Cliff explained he was a singer from England and asked the man to pass along his hello, then he and his friend simply ran off. Cliff later called it silly when he looked back on it. This wasn't a nervous fan losing his nerve at random. This was a rising star who had built his whole persona on Elvis's blueprint, standing on his hero's actual doorstep, and something in him just short-circuited. Meeting an idol sounds perfect in theory. In reality, it's unpredictable, awkward, human. Maybe, deep down, Cliff didn't want to risk breaking the illusion. The second missed connection is hazier. As Cliff has recounted it, there was some kind of plan in the works at one point, but it simply never came together. 2 global stars orbiting each other, never quite connecting. This is the big one, the one that eventually went viral. While Cliff was in America promoting his hit Devil Woman, a journalist who knew Elvis interviewed him and, aware of his admiration for the king, offered to arrange a meeting. Cliff said yes immediately. Of course he did. This was the idol he'd dug potatoes out of the ground for, the man whose door he'd knocked on in Germany. But at the end of the interview, Cliff asked to put it off. His reason: Elvis had gained a lot of weight, and if a photo of the 2 of them was going to end up on his refrigerator, he wanted Elvis to look right in it. So he waited. And then Elvis died, on August 16, 1977, at just 42 years old. Every one of those chances, the door in Germany, the journalist's offer, vanished for good. Fast forward to November 2023. Cliff Richard, 83 at the time, appears on This Morning to promote his memoir, A Head Full of Music, and a new album. Host Alison Hammond, alongside Dermot O'Leary, asks whether he ever met Elvis, with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, also present as a guest editor that day. Cliff told the story exactly as he remembered it: the journalist, the offer, and the reason he turned it down, that Elvis had put on weight and he wanted a good photo for his fridge. The studio went quiet. The clip went viral almost instantly, and social media exploded, with many accusing Cliff of fat-shaming the late king of rock and roll. Others praised Alison Hammond for her visible, unspoken reaction in the moment. To be fair, a few things are worth unpacking. Cliff told the story with no apparent sense that it might land badly. He seemed caught up in nostalgia, not cruelty. But the Elvis of 1976 wasn't simply a celebrity who'd gained weight. He was a man in serious medical and personal crisis, struggling with dependency on prescription medication, surrounded by people who worked for him, increasingly isolated from the outside world. He was a deeply troubled human being in the final chapter of his life, and Cliff's offhand comment, however unintentional, reduced all of that to a question of how he'd look in a photograph. The backlash was swift, loud, and largely deserved. But then something else happened. Cliff actually sat with what he'd done. At 85, Cliff is still talking, still reflecting, and still, it seems, haunted. In a later interview on Gold Radio, he opened up more fully. He said he regretted the decision, because Elvis died not long afterward and none of them could have known that was coming. He called himself stupid and said he'd regretted it every day since. He said he would love to be able to say he'd met Elvis, but he hadn't. That's a very different tone from the breezy anecdote on This Morning. He also explained the weight comment in more context this time. He'd planned to wait until Elvis made his next film, since Elvis typically dieted and got back into shape for movie roles. But by delaying, he missed his window entirely. Within a year of that conversation, Elvis was gone. And then came the line that arguably redeems the whole episode. Cliff said he would give anything to go back and simply take the photo, that he'd rather have a picture of an overweight Elvis than no picture at all. That's the real lesson he now tries to pass on to anyone who'll listen. If you get the chance for a photo with someone you admire, take it. Don't wait. In his memoir, Cliff repeats a phrase again and again: no Elvis, no Cliff. It isn't hyperbole, it's a plain statement of fact. Everything he built over 6+ decades, more than 250 million records sold worldwide, over 130 UK top 20 singles, the only artist to score a UK #1 in 5 consecutive decades, traces back to that green Citroën parked on a Hertfordshire street in May 1956. Cliff has described first hearing Elvis as encountering something like an alien art form, before realizing it was really hillbilly music, bluegrass, country, gospel, and rhythm and blues all fused together. It wasn't just a musical revelation, it was personal. He didn't hear Elvis and want to be famous. He heard Elvis and wanted to make people feel something the way he just felt it. As he put it in his memoir, Elvis sounded like he was singing directly to him, young, cool, and immediate in a way that no one else of that era was. The debt extended beyond Cliff himself. The entire British rock and roll scene, the one that would eventually produce the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the British Invasion, needed that initial spark from Memphis. Cliff dominated British pop in the pre-Beatles years of the late 50s and early 60s, serving as proof that American rock and roll could be translated and loved on the other side of the Atlantic. He built all of it on a foundation Elvis laid.